Hi guys, welcome back to the RAD Hyrox podcast. Today we are joined by Darryl Corley. He's a nutrition coach focused specifically in the Hyrox space, and I quote, helps you smash your Hyrox PBs and look good whilst doing it. So obviously we had to bring him on the podcast to find out exactly how we look so good to smash PBs in the Hyrox space, especially when we're all running around with our shirts off and in sports bras. So welcome, Darryl.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And both are equally important as each other.
Yes. Love it.
Especially with summer coming up, hey?
Oh, you're telling me. Yeah, absolutely. But thanks for having me.
Oh no, it's great to have you on. Before we get too into all the top tips of nutrition and how you can help us and our lovely listeners, we wanted to take it back to the beginning and ask how you first got into sport and then into nutrition. Have you always been sporty from being a kid?
Yeah, so I was always in school. I was always that guy that kind of played every sport, very much like a jack of all trades, master of none. Like I was good at a lot of things. I was never like the best. And that kind of like fed into basically going into becoming a personal trainer. I was that for about 8 or 9 years. And then I always loved nutrition. I always found it super interesting. But I just always found it was like a minefield of information. I never really understood what was kind of the best nutrition for me. And I was kind of like following a specific diet, and then I did a random diploma just out of just interest, really, and realized everything that I thought about nutrition was completely wrong. I was training quite heavily, like 13 hours a week, doing a lot of CrossFit based training, endurance based exercise, and then realized that I was completely underfueled and overtrained. And then it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me because at that point I was thinking, I just don't ever want to be in a position where I'm not really sure what I'm doing from a nutrition sense. So at that point, I straight away enrolled for a master's degree with St. Mary's. And I've kind of been working in the space ever since. I've been in the space of nutrition now for about 4 or 5 years, since 2019, so 5 years. And more specifically with Hyrox, probably about 2 years. Pretty much as soon as I started doing Hyrox, I kind of jumped into it and started working with people as well, just because I just find it so interesting. And it's a real, with Hyrox, it's difficult because it's short enough to potentially get away with not kind of doing the whole eating during and that sort of thing, like shorter than a marathon. So you could complete a Hyrox without eating properly, but it's long enough that if you don't, it's going to obviously massively affect your nutrition. And that's where a lot of people struggle. They know they need to eat, but they don't really know how much and when and what to do with training and what to do with like race day strategy. And that's kind of where I step in.
Yeah, I think like using the word, sorry, it being a minefield is so true. Like I think there's so many things out there, so many options, and people focus so hard on their training, but if their nutrition isn't supporting that, you're almost like throwing away the hard training work and the, like you say, and getting overtrained and not fueling properly, and then you can't complete the sessions and you get into like this vicious cycle as such. So for your first Hyrox, did you complete that as a solo or doubles or?
Yes, that was a solo. I did that, yeah, like pretty much just after COVID. And I did it randomly just because I randomly came across Hyrox through Hunter. Didn't really know what it was. I'd basically just done a Spartan race and placed 8 out of 3,000 people. So
Oh,
I was
wow.
I was kind of like, oh, maybe this whole obstacle course racing thing could be quite good for me. And so I was kind of looking at other similar type events, and I was watching this program where basically it's like it had Stone Cold Steve Austin in it, and basically people had to try and do this obstacle course race and beat this guy's time, and that guy ended up being Hunter. So I kind of like followed him on Instagram as you do, and saw he was talking about this thing called Hyrox, and I saw that it was doing one in London like later on that year. So I just signed up for it. Didn't really know what it was. Didn't really train properly for it. I'd say I did okay. I didn't do amazing, but then 2 days later, I got an email saying that I'd been invited to like the World Championships, which was Vegas later on the following year. And that's kind of like what did it for me in terms of like, I was like, wow, this is really cool. And for me, it was like a once in a lifetime opportunity. I didn't expect to ever qualify for another World Championships. I was just like, I need to make the most of it before everyone becomes a lot better than me.
That's cool.
So
You
did
went to
head
like
over
one of the first. Yeah.
Yeah, you headed over, I guess.
It was crazy. It was so cool. It was like, I remember when I first got there, and I think on the Friday they did the whole opening ceremony as they do for every World Championships, and they had people, they'd call out every country and say, oh, here's the UK. And I think we had like Queen playing and stuff like that, and like people with flags. I literally felt like I was in the Olympics. I almost got a Hyrox tattoo, because obviously that's what you do in the Olympics, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, it literally blew my mind. And I was like, I'm in Vegas about to do some random competition tomorrow. And I'm getting my country called out and all this kind of stuff. And obviously you get T-shirts with your flag on it and your name. And I was just like, wow, this is super cool.
That's so cool. I feel a bit hard done by going to Manchester now. I feel like we were a year too late. Was it 22, I'm guessing. The year before must have been Vegas. That would have been a well better trip.
They do say Manchester is the new Vegas. So
do they? Do they?
well, we can get that going. We can start.
Start it up.
Oh no, that's really cool. So what about your nutrition then? Like has it changed much since you competed in Hyrox? Like now that you're focusing on it more specifically from like the original advice and things that you thought, has it kind of changed since you've competed and done the race?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Even though I'm very much kind of dialed in with my nutrition, I focus on it quite a lot. I kind of fell into the trap of, well, it's only really an hour of high intensity exercise. I'll probably be okay. And when it got to Vegas, I literally crash and burned. Like everything that could have gone wrong did. Obviously, I was away from home in Vegas. You don't really have supermarkets. My nutrition, whilst I did focus on certain things like having carbohydrate dense foods and all that kind of stuff, I wouldn't say I really fully focused on it. And there's lots of stuff which I do with my clients now, which are based upon obviously the amount of people that I've worked with and obviously work in the space over the last 2 years, but also like the mistakes that I made early on in my kind of Hyrox experience. But yeah, definitely like even little things like focusing on having enough carbohydrates around your training and testing out on the day nutrition. I never did that. Whereas it's so important, because otherwise it's kind of, when you get to the day, it's a bit of a guessing game. And you kind of look at you might be competing at 11 a.m. and you're like, well, I usually have this for breakfast. I'll just go for that. And it kind of goes one or two ways usually. You either under fuel and you run out of energy, or you eat too much and you feel sick. It's very rare that you guess it and get it right. So like little things like that, which I never did. But obviously in my more recent ones I have done, and I make sure that people I'm working with, that we will drill and test week on week leading up to any events that they have, just so we know for a fact this is the meals that we know we can have. And we know that it will help us in terms of energy, but also isn't going to have any like side effects or bad symptoms.
Yeah. And I think you touched on it then about like knowing what to eat and like for breakfast and things, and say an event was at 11, but like I feel Hyrox is one of those things where you don't know when you're competing until probably the week before. So like for the first time ever, every time we've competed, we've been competing in the morning at like 8 a.m, 8:30. For the first time ever when we were at Olympia, we competed at 3 p.m. And both of us automatically were like, weird. What do we do for the day? Because like we can't just have our breakfast, have something pre-race and then go, which is what we're so used to. And probably in any other sport, I've always started in the morning. So I feel like, some people are competing at 8, 9 at night. Do you do anything with that? What advice would you give to someone? How do you prepare not knowing when you're going to race over a weekend?
Yeah, it's definitely part of the fun, isn't it? But yeah, they don't give you your exact time until the Wednesday before, but they do give rough timings. So, for example, they usually say solo women's is between 9 and 2, which is obviously a massive window.
True.
And usually what I'll do with people is, it's kind of like Murphy's Law, right? Everything that can go wrong will go wrong. You prepare for the worst, hope for the best. So I'll usually test food with them in the worst possible time. So it will be, okay, well, if you're definitely going to compete at 9 a.m., then let's trial having certain foods lean up to that time. And then we kind of get that part right. And then we will then also test, okay, well, however, if it's later on in the day, let's trial that strategy as well. So going into it, we kind of got one or two strategies. And then when it gets to race day, obviously a few days before we know what it is, we'll just tweak and tailor. So we're not fully there, because it's not possible to be fully there in terms of portion size and stuff, but we kind of know roughly where it's going to be. In terms of the late races, that's obviously a really tricky thing to overcome, just because, and when I was in Manchester last year, I competed at 5 p.m., which for me was not ideal, just because obviously you're there all day, you tend to be walking around cheering on your friends, and whilst you're doing all of this, you're obviously losing energy. You're kind of like, when you wake up, you're super pumped, and sometimes you can have a bit of a slump. But same again, it's just, as long as you prepare before and you know that rough, okay, well, I'm going to be competing maybe between 1 and 8 p.m. Same again, testing strategies, but then also having like a activity strategy for that day as well. So little things like, okay, well, I'm competing at 8 p.m., so I'm going to make sure I sleep until 9. I'm then going to get up and I'm going to go for a walk, just kind of get my body moving a little bit. Then I might do a little bit of mobility. Then I'm going to go back to my hotel, maybe have like a power nap. Then I'm going to go to the event, soak up the atmosphere, go back, like doing something where you have some kind of structure, albeit loose, but a structure where you're not kind of just at the event all day from 10 and then competing at 8, because that's where you'll get to 8 and you'll just be like pretty tired before you even started. And a lot of people do that. They'll get to the event and then they'll just be there all day. It gets to their race time, they're like, wow, I'm pooped.
Yeah.
And that can be the biggest challenge of them all, really, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And then people forget to fuel as well, because they just kind of get so carried away in like cheering everyone on and the hype of the event, and then it's like, oh, I'm racing soon and I haven't even eaten properly or stayed hydrated or anything.
Yeah.
So what about for our listeners, if there was someone listening who doesn't know where to start, they've never looked at their nutrition really, they focused on their training, but they just kind of do whatever, eat whatever, whenever, like, do you have maybe kind of 3 set things that people could follow that might help them get started, or where should they go to begin on like looking deeper into their nutrition?
Definitely. So the first thing I would do is just start tracking my food as I normally eat using MyFitnessPal. Super easy to track. There's even like a barcode scanner if you're buying stuff. So it's easy to pull through the ingredients and the macronutrients, calorie intakes and stuff, just to get a rough understanding of where I'm currently at in my nutrition. The good thing about MyFitnessPal is it gives an overview of like your total calories and macronutrients and stuff for the day, but it also gives percentages of your makeup of different macronutrients. Just for those who are listening and they have never heard the word macronutrient before, that's just a collective term for proteins, fats, and carbohydrates and water. And as a percentage, you want your carbohydrates to be between, for Hyrox, like 50 to 60%. Definitely no lower than 45. On experience, I find a lot of people are anything from 30 to 45%. So they quite often aren't eating enough carbohydrates. So I'd firstly make sure that you're within that kind of like 50 to as high as 60%, depending on training frequency and obviously intensity. If you're not, then I'd definitely make sure you're working within that. The reason being, carbohydrates are the most efficient fuel source for high intensity training, and Hyrox is definitely high intensity. Like fats take 3 times as long to be converted to energy. Protein, you don't really get much energy. It's very much a recovery macronutrient. The second one would be, what are you eating around your training? A lot of people, especially those who train early in the morning, tend to train fasted. And that's kind of the equivalent of jumping in your car without any petrol. It might move, but it's going to kind of like not move particularly efficiently. It's probably not going to reach top speed. It's going to break down at some point in the future. So definitely eating around your training. If you struggle to eat in the morning and when you're training in the morning, little things like a smoothie, a glass of orange juice, or something like that, liquid carbohydrates will really help. And then the third one, probably it's not really nutrition based, but adequate recovery. Just because I find a lot of people overtrain in Hyrox. A lot of people who I first start working with are probably training 6 or 7 times a week. Sometimes they're training like 10 hours a week. And the issue with that is that eventually your body's just going to say no. So making sure that you're recovering enough, just because if you can go a full season without injuring yourself, you're going to be far fitter and far stronger and a far better runner than if you train like 7 times a week and 3 months in, 4 months in, you pull a muscle or you inflame your tendons and stuff like that, or you pull your calf, which are very frequent injuries within Hyrox.
Yeah, it's so true. I think people do like take for granted a little bit how much nutrition can help recovery and therefore help prevent injury. And you want to be doing it prior, not after. Like it's like, yeah, prehab, isn't it? Like with food as well, so that you're preparing your body and you're not kind of having to just fix it up afterwards. And what about, like, I guess without getting too, I don't know, one-sided, but like people seem to be scared of carbs, or they think like, oh, if I eat loads of carbs, I'm going to put on weight, or like that's what they are initially going to cut out of their diet, like to try and like lose weight. Is there anything that you could say to kind of help people understand that by eating like a good diet to help support your training, that's therefore going to help you like maybe and help your physique look the way you want it, instead of like under fueling? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, this is a question which I'm consistently and very frequently asked, is if I eat my carbs, am I going to put weight on? And it's just due to years and years, decades of misinformation around carbs make you fat, carbs are the devil, and all that kind of stuff. Ultimately, every time they've tested weight loss and weight gain, and they've tested it across different eating habits, so keto, kind of high fats, high protein, high carb, low carb, fasting, every time they've tested the different diets together but kept the calorie consumption the same, it's almost always come down to your calorie consumption, irrespective of what you're eating within that. So example, if you're eating more calories than you are expending, burning off, then you're likely to put some weight on. If you're under eating that, then yes, you're probably going to lose weight. So firstly, when it comes to carbs make you fat, unless you are overeating in terms of the calorie consumption, then it's not likely to happen. But also there's that secondary effect that if you start training without eating enough carbohydrates, your training is obviously going to be impeded. And then from a secondary level, you're not going to be able to train as hard. So therefore your whole calorie burning during and after your sessions is likely to be lower. And therefore you actually might find that if you're trying to change your body composition, that may be affected by the fact that you're under eating on carbohydrates. Thirdly, with carbohydrates, that's where your fruits, your vegetables come from. So if you're not eating enough carbohydrates, you're likely to be having less vitamins and minerals, which same again will then affect your body composition goals as well. So there's so many reasons why you shouldn't skip carbs to lose weight if that is your goal.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's really big in Hyrox. I think we've probably seen it, but also we work with a lot of runners as well, and like ultra running. And I think even just looking at that and how much you need to eat per hour just to keep to like fuel like your runs. I know you alluded to marathons. I think we work with a lot of people that run marathons, and you're talking about taking like 40 to 60 grams of carbs for some people on an hour to fuel their marathon race to try and get a PB, and people are just like, what? Like it's crazy. People think you're mad by suggesting how many carbs they should take on.
Yeah, it is. And I tend to find that a lot of people just have loads of protein, because protein is obviously the main and best macronutrient according to the internet, which same again just isn't the case. It's just lots of misinformation, people trying to push certain diet habits or methodologies which best suit them. But yeah, like carbohydrates are so key.
Yeah. And protein as well. I mean, I know like we're talking on carbs and we're trying to say carbs are king, but like protein, following like a workout, protein and creatine and things like that. Could you cover a bit on that for like muscle repair and
Yeah,
muscular
absolutely.
performance?
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned earlier, protein is predominantly a kind of like recovery macronutrient. So obviously when you're training, your body comes under a lot of like inflammation. You're kind of, for want of a better phrase, you're kind of breaking your muscles down. But basically what you kind of want that, because with that inflammation, they grow back bigger, stronger, fitter, right? And you need a couple of nutrients and stuff like that to aid that, one of which is protein. So it's really important to make sure you're having enough protein throughout the day. In terms of kind of like a dosage level, on average, 20 to 30 grams per sitting is probably enough per person. And you probably need, I said, a lot of people will overeat protein just because obviously it's meat and it's tasty, but also they think it's the best macronutrient. But on a daily basis, you probably need like 1.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. So, for example, for a 70-kilo person, they probably only need like 100 and like 110, 120 grams a day, whereas most people have far more than that. In terms of supplementation, yeah, creatine is obviously really important for just helping kind of like, without kind of going to the science of things, but basically just giving you a little bit more energy, a bit more strength during your kind of like resistance-based training. It can also potentially help with cardiovascular efficiency and endurance training as well. But in terms of like, if you're competing in Hyrox and you need to get strong for like the sled push, the wall balls, the sled pull, taking stuff like creatine can really help in terms of improving your power, your strength for those types of movements. And it is one of the best researched supplement which has shown to give benefits, in terms of like it almost always provides benefits towards the individual irrespective of their goals.
Oh, interesting.
And then what about sorry, I feel like my brain is like so much information. Trying to cover everything. What about like hydration? So kind of electrolytes, salts, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, so water again is super important nutrient. Like on average, 60 to sometimes as high as 65% of our body is literally water. So it's really important that we're getting enough of it, because if you're dehydrated as little as 2 or 3%, it can have a marked decrease in performance. So it's really important to make sure we are drinking on a daily basis just through life, but also if you're doing stuff like Hyrox, which tends to be quite sweaty, we need to make sure that we are drinking a lot of it. On average, kind of like 2-ish liters of water per day, but that is definitely, that's kind of, that number changes depending on your body weight, how often you're training, your sweat levels and stuff like that as well. But as a rough average, we say kind of like roughly 2,000 calories ish, give or take. I would, for someone who is heavily training for Hyrox, I would also take electrolytes as well. There's a lot of electrolytes out there in terms of different powders. Some are really cheap, some are really expensive. Ultimately, all you really need is potassium and sodium chlorides. There are some which will have like magnesium, calcium in them and stuff like that, which are all electrolytes. You don't really need them because in your sweat, there's not enough of that being lost through your sweat. So it's just really a good electrolyte powder is just, you just need a decent amount of kind of like potassium and sodium chlorides. But yeah, I would definitely say it's super important, both just throughout the day, but also drinking during your sessions if you can, and definitely replacing your kind of lost water afterwards as well. The best way to understand how much water you should drink after your session is just to weigh yourself before and after. So say, example, I step on the scales and I weigh 90 kilos. After my session, I'm 89. So that's 1 kilo lost, which is about 1 liter of water lost. So over the coming hours, 4, 5, 6 hours after that, you want to be replacing with about 150% of that. So drinking about 1.5 liters of water over the kind of like 5, 6, 7 hours after that. And I would be doing it as every kind of 15 to 20 minutes, take about 2 or 3 gulps, because if you drink it too quickly, you're going to go straight to the toilet. But yeah, hydration is really important in terms of energy, recovery, and everything else as well.
Oh, that's cool. And sticking on the liquids then, what's your thoughts and advice around caffeine, coffee, tea, green teas, herbal teas? What's your advice around energy drinks, that kind of thing?
Yeah, big fan. I don't often drink energy drinks just because for me it just makes me feel bloated and stuff. But definitely, like you've got your Noccos and your Monsters and stuff like that, which obviously have a lot of caffeine in one can. But yeah, caffeine is similar to creatine in the sense that it's really good for endurance exercise. Basically, what caffeine does is it reduces your hormone, which basically makes you feel tired. So it kind of acts as a blocker. And basically, what that then does, it just makes you feel more energetic. So yeah, definitely, I do take caffeine. I encourage my clients to take caffeine around their training. The average coffee has anything from like 80 to 120 milligrams per cup. So I think it's really important to, before you start jumping on the Monster or the energy drink or the coffee bandwagon, is just trialing it in training, because obviously some people are more susceptible to caffeine than others. Like I've got some friends who will have a coffee at 1 o'clock and then they won't sleep. Or they might get side effects like feeling a bit anxious, jittery, and stuff like that. Whereas I've got other people who will have 8 coffees a day and they'll sleep perfectly. So I think the important thing around caffeine is trialing having caffeine on a daily basis. If you're someone who already has caffeine, you have coffees and stuff, just trialing certain dosages, probably about 60-ish minutes prior to training. And I would personally encourage not to be having it too late in the day because it can affect your sleep quality. But at the same time, it's person to person dependent.
Yeah, no, fair. I think that's a very fair answer. What are you a flat white guy or a cappuccino? Strong black?
I do love a flat white, an oat flat white. Southwest London, so we're bougie.
Oh, there we go.
So I do like an oat flat white, although I have been venturing out into the cappuccinos recently. But it depends on, like a macchiato. To be honest, I'm a bit of a, I drink, if it's coffee, I'll drink it all, to be honest. It's not a latte because it makes me go to the toilet.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not a flat white or a cappuccino. It's all good.
I mean, surely it's iced coffee season now, no? Like everyone outside in the sunshine having an iced coffee.
I think it's only sunny up in Scotland right now, which is a saying I didn't think I'd say. It's not so. Is it sunny down south?
It is not. No, I didn't realize that the sun ever came out in Scotland.
Mate, honestly, mate, we've had a week of 25 degrees. We're in shorts and t-shirts. I know. Who knew?
I think you both looked a bit golden.
I've got a few more freckles. I think Em's got the tan. Go on, Em.
Can I go? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if you've got a few examples for, I know everyone's different and it depends on preference and how much certain people need and how much they're training. But do you have some ideas of, like, say, a breakfast, snack, lunch, dinner of someone who was training for Hyrox maybe 5 times a week? Like anything that they could maybe try or you think would help support their training if they're at a loss as to where to even start?
Yeah, so really good question. Breakfast, I would speak, obviously it very much depends on time they're training, but I'm going to keep it general. Breakfast, my go-to would literally be simply like oats with maybe some protein powder if you fancy it, probably 2 pieces of fruit. So like chopped up banana, maybe some blueberries, and you could put some honey in there as well. My go-to snacks tend to be quite carbohydrate dense. So anything, and I'm kind of saying this is snacks closer to training, but anything like, it could be a banana, a saurine bar, or even little things like the mini pancakes. They're quite good as a pre-workout snack just because they're higher in sugar. A banana has potassium in it, which is obviously an electrolyte, but also they're high in what's called the GI scale, which the glycemic index scale is basically a rating for food, which from 0 to 99, the higher the number, the quicker it's absorbed into your system and provides energy to your body. So they're all kind of quite high in that GI scale, therefore will give you a quick bump of energy close to training. My lunches, very typically some kind of complex carbohydrates. It could be rice with chopped sweet potato or couscous or pasta, whatever your preference is, piece of meat, and I would probably be looking for like 2 pieces of vegetables. Obviously season it as you like. And then, yeah, dinners, dependent on when you're training and stuff like that, I tend to go a little bit lighter for dinners just because I just don't enjoy eating big meals in the evening. So I would go for something like a stir fry, or maybe even like an egg omelette, or yeah, probably those two are like my personal go-tos.
No, that's ace. It gives like just some ideas of people, of like for people of where to kind of start and what sort of things you're looking at. And then what about meal prep? Are you like a big believer in meal prep, or do you prefer having stuff fresh, or what's your thoughts on that?
I do encourage it just because from a time point, it just makes sense. And a lot of people are quite busy with work, training, family, social lives. So I would always encourage just to prepare, and just it allows you to stick to a plan and have it ready. Some people don't like meal prepping because, like, as you've already said, 2 days later, it's not obviously going to be as fresh as if you've made it on the day. So if you prefer to make it on the day, if you've got the time to do that, then by all means crack on. I've got some clients who don't like meal prepping, but also can't make stuff on the day. So with them, I'll provide them with food options which they can grab on the go. But yeah, in terms of meal prepping, I do think that for most people, it is a better option.
Yeah, it just means that they can like go to the shop, get it sorted, and then they've got a plan. I mean, I am probably one of those fussy people that likes to eat things fresh and doesn't do as much meal prep. But when you're short on time, it is a good thing to do for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if
And
you're doing like, sorry, but even if you're doing like 3 days in advance, because I used to do meal prep for like 6 days, and I'd get to like the 5th day and the vegetables would just be looking so sad. So like, even if you do like 3 days in advance, it should still stay relatively fresh, but at the same time, you're still saving a lot of time on that second and third day where you would otherwise be making your food. But yeah, it is definitely a preference thing.
Yeah.
yeah, I think if people are busy, and sometimes you can just make a larger meal, can't you? I mean, we don't mind eating a meal like day after day. I'm not too fussed about having to have something different the next day, but you can usually make a bigger meal the night before and have it again the next day, you know, or freeze some of it, I guess. There's
Yeah,
loads of ways like that.
yeah,
Um, so when this podcast goes out, this episode goes out, it'll be a few weeks until Worlds. So anyone that's listening to this now and thinking, oh, I've got Worlds coming up, what should they do? Should they do anything differently in the week lead up and when they get there? Obviously it's out in Nice, so anyone that lives in Nice is fine, but there'll be a lot of people traveling to Nice. And I mean the French food's pretty good, isn't it? But what would your advice be to somebody going to Worlds for the week lead up, and while they're there, what would you suggest they
yeah,
do to try and enhance their nutrition?
yeah, definitely. And in terms of obviously, yeah, like where you're located, as you already said, if you're based in France, it's easy. If you're not, then yeah, you've got there's a lot to think about in terms of navigating. So firstly, it's obviously the food options you've got available, where you're staying, sleep patterns and stuff like that. From a nutrition standpoint, I would be increase the week leading up to it. I would be depending on what your carbohydrate intake is, but I would probably be increasing it by 10 to 20%. Hopefully by this point you've already tested this number and you know you're okay with it. But yeah, roughly 10 to 20%. You don't necessarily need to be carb loading, but just topping up those glycogen stores, I would definitely encourage. As you're increasing your carbohydrates, I would just equally reduce your fats and proteins across the two. The day before your event, or the night before, I would definitely be having a big carbohydrate dense meal. So something like pasta, like tomato based pasta, is perfect. Try to keep your fiber low, just because it can put a bit of pressure on your digestive system, which you definitely don't want whilst you're running. And obviously decreasing your protein, your fats, even more so, because you just don't really need it prior to a Hyrox race. In terms of navigating the food side of it, obviously, as you're kind of like preparing for the Worlds, you're going to know where you're staying. You're either in an Airbnb or a hotel. So within that, you need to think about, okay, well, what am I going to do in terms of food? If I've got an Airbnb, then you're probably going to have a kitchen, and I would be looking at, okay, well, are there any supermarkets within close proximity? And then just kind of like creating a bit of a plan where you're pretty confident there's going to be foods there. So like if you go to a supermarket in France, they're probably going to have like oats, they're probably going to have breads, they're probably going to have rice, pastas and stuff like that. So you can probably comfortably feel like they're going to be there. But then also bring some stuff with you as well. So like some non-perishable foods, just bring it with you. So the stuff like your soaring bars, rice cakes, dried fruits, kind of like energy bars, energy gels, these sorts of things, just bring them with you. Just there's less things that you need to buy when you're there. If you're staying in a hotel or something like that, then I would be looking at, okay, well, what restaurants are close to where I'm staying? And then most restaurants will have a website. If they have a website, they're going to have a menu. So I'd be looking at, okay, well, I'm going to stay at this, or so I'm going to eat at this restaurant. I'd be looking at their menu. Okay, perfect. They do like a spaghetti bolognese type pasta. Perfect. That's my meal the night before. And yeah, in terms of like on the day, similarly, either have the food ready that you're going to eat prior to the event and stuff like that, or just make sure that your hotel or there's a supermarket where you can buy your breakfast and whatever snacks that you don't bring with you as well. I think it's also important to think about what else outside of nutrition do I need to think about? So little things like if you're staying in a hotel, are you staying close to bars and clubs and stuff like that? Could that potentially disrupt your sleep? So taking stuff like earbuds. If you're someone who struggles with certain pillows, for example, I find it hard to sleep on pillows that aren't rock solid. So if they're like soft, fluffy ones, I find it hard to sleep. So if you're that person, potentially bring a pillow with you. Eye mask if kind of like that could potentially affect you, and little things like that just to help with your sleep as well, which I've heard a lot of people have gone to certain Hyrox events abroad and they've slept for 3 hours the night before and it's completely ruined their race.
Yeah, it is really important, and all these little things like add up, don't they? So if you can just try to be as prepared as possible and give yourself the best chance, like it's definitely the way forward.
Yeah.
And so what about that? We kind of touched on briefly about fueling during actual Hyrox. Like I know we were saying that it's kind of that awkward time where it's about an hour, so it's not a full-on like marathon where you're doing 3, 4, 5 hours of work, but it's longer than 20 minutes, half an hour. Like I personally, like I need to fuel during my Hyrox. Like, I mean, I always need fuel. I always eat whatever happens. But, and I know everyone's different, but generally, like, what would your advice be? Or like, what do you think's kind of like the standard generic, like, nutrition for a Hyrox race?
Yeah, technically you don't have to eat during, just because it's short enough to get by. I do encourage people to eat during though, just because of the intensity. And I usually encourage them to, because most people go into a race and have a rough time that they're aiming for, or just look at where the kind of like middle part of the race is, which is usually in and around the rowers. And I would probably be encouraging people to take like a gel or something like that at around that point, not because you're going to hit a wall and like not be able to move, but you think about little things like towards the end of the race, you would have run 8K by that point. You've got 100 or 75 wall balls, depending on the event, to get through as well. Your energy stores are going to be pretty much not near zero, but they're going to be pretty low, pretty used. Just by having like an energy gel or something like that, which will give you like 20 to 40 grams of carbohydrates at that point, super high in sugar and stuff like that, absorbed very quickly, will just help just to give you a little bit more towards the end of the race. And I think more and more people are implementing that into that race now. A lot of people use stuff like jelly beans or jelly-based sweets and stuff like that. I tried that in Manchester and I was choked. So I would definitely, be well, it basically melted in my pocket, and I think I just got off the rower or something, and I was just like, right, halfway point, time to refuel, and it was basically just one big ball of jelly, and I chucked it and my mouth was so dry. I think it took me a lap to swallow. So definitely trial whatever your preference is in terms of eating during. Trial it during a simulation or some kind of longer high intensity WODs, that whatever you're doing as part of your training, just to make sure, one, that you don't get digestive issues with it. Some people struggle with gels, but also it doesn't melt and choke you.
Yeah, very wise.
Very
You heard
key.
it here first.
Oh no, I think that is very good advice, actually.
And so going off that, then leading on from that, because that's just brought me to a thought. What are the three biggest mistakes, apart from putting a bunch of jelly beans in your pocket, that you see in nutrition, whether it's race day or leading up to race day, or just when you take a new client on, something that pops up again and again? What are the three mistakes that people make that you think?
Yeah. So first thing is just not eating enough carbohydrates. They will be running on empty. The amount of times that I've worked with someone, and usually what I'll do, if it's someone who I believe is too low in carbohydrates, I get them to do a WODs where they're currently at, and then I'll get them to do it again with some kind of carbohydrate strategy. And quite often they'll beat whatever their time is on that particular workout by like 5 or 6 minutes. It's so important. So
Crazy.
yeah, it's mental. So first thing is just not enough carbohydrates. The second one is training fasted. And the third one from a nutrition sense is probably not drink enough water. I think like a lot of people drink water, but I think they either drink it in big parts at certain points because they forget to drink water, and then 4 hours like, oh my god, I forgot to drink water, I'll just drink 500 milliliters. And obviously what happens is about 20 minutes later, like, oh, whenever I drink 2 liters of water, Darryl, I go straight to the toilet. I'm like, well, I wonder why that is. So probably either not drinking enough during the day or just not drinking consistently throughout the day.
Yeah, that's a fair shout. And I feel like you can get so, I mean, if you're working, you can get so sucked into stuff. And people, I know one of the big things when I used to work in an office was that a lot of people said they didn't want to drink when they were in meetings and things because they didn't want to have to keep going out to go to the toilet. Like they didn't want to be that person. So people are almost scared to drink just in case.
Yeah,
I was always the one that had a water bottle, but
yeah,
it's always a good excuse to leave a meeting, isn't it? To go to the toilet.
yeah. Especially if it's a less, let's say less, a bit of a more boring one. You're like, oh, I need a toilet. Just get
Yeah. Exactly. I know, it's a great excuse. And so do you have any future projects coming up, goals, targets, anything that's like on the horizon? You're looking
personally
in
or professionally.
personally and with your nutrition business? What direction are you going in? What's on the
Yeah,
horizon for that nutritional guy, Darryl?
that nutrition. I think personally, I just want to. At the moment, I've got a hip injury where I tore 2 hip tendons towards the end of last summer. So personally, I just want to get back into Hyrox. I'm booked in
Yeah.
for October Birmingham, which will be my first one back in about a year and a half. So I'm hoping I can get fit for that one. And
Amazing.
because as I said at the start of this podcast, I absolutely sunk at Vegas. That's been my Hyroxes since then have been doubles. So I kind of feel like there's unfinished business in the kind of like Hyrox solo world for me. So I want to get back, and I kind of want to really give the solo Hyrox a go, because when I did that, as I said, I didn't really properly train for it because I didn't know what I was doing. So I want to get sub 60 in a solo Hyrox, which I feel
Nice.
is doable because I hit it as a doubles, which albeit obviously it's a lot easier as a doubles, but our running times we were hitting were within that realm. So that's kind of from a personal level. In terms of professional, I just want to just kind of like really build within Hyrox. I've got I feel like I've kind of built a relatively good base, but at the same time, I just want to just continue to just push and build within Hyrox and just make it easier for people to know what they need to be eating for their events so they can get the times that they're looking for. Just because I feel like it's such an accessible sport that you can achieve success in so many different ways, whether you do well in your own age category, whether you get a new PB, whether you go to the World Championships. I feel it's so accessible to everyone, irrespective of your age, gender, and everything else. I just want to build within that and help as many people as possible.
Yeah, that's amazing. And one thing I was going to ask you, and I totally forgot, but it just came back to me when you were saying that. Supplementation. What's your thoughts on supplements, best supplements that you think are a waste of money, or
Yeah, sure. So
Hyrox specifically?
yeah, so in terms of supplements, which I take myself when I'm obviously training, but also encourage my clients, creatine, for obviously the reasons which I've already mentioned. It's very good for just improving power and strength during those stations. I take obviously electrolytes just due to just the losses that you experience through training, through the daily basis, and competition. Beetroot shots are really good for aerobic kind of efficiency. So they help with just transporting oxygen around your body and actually utilizing that oxygen as well, which I feel like more and more people are starting to take it. However, it's still something which not a lot of people take. A lot of people don't like the taste of beetroot, but if you get like the super concentrated shots through, like Beat It is one brand, not a plug, not an ad, but they're quite good. In terms of other supplements,
Sorry, on the beetroot juice, is that like you need to take it every day? Or, you know, I see some people that like just put up a picture that they take one like before the race, and I'm like, is that going to do anything if that's the only one you've taken just before a race? Like, does it need to build up in your system and be a regular thing, or how does it work?
yes, you need to load it up in your system. It probably takes about 2 to 3 weeks to do that. So if you just take a one-off beetroot shot, you're probably not going to experience much benefits. So if it's something which you do want to take, I would just have it kind of as part of your daily routine or whenever you're training. But it will take 2 to 3 weeks to get into your system before you experience any real benefits from it.
Cool.
And the reason why I encourage the shots is because if you just have beetroot by itself, just sort of you get it from the supermarket and stuff, for you to get the benefits of that, you probably need about 400 grams of it, which is a hell of a lot of beetroot. So unless you love beetroot, I probably wouldn't do that. And obviously you can get beetroot juice, but most of the beetroot juice, when you actually look at the ingredients in the back, a lot of it is only like 10 or maybe 20% beetroot, and the rest is like water and other stuff. So same again, you'd probably need to drink about 4 liters to get the same benefits, whereas one shot is very easy to consume.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point, because if you look at stuff like the back of like almond milk, for example, you look on the back of it, it's like 2% almonds and like 90% water. I'm just like, you're hard. Yeah, it's sometimes like it is good to look at exactly, instead of just blindly buying something or taking it off the shelf and thinking, oh great, yeah, I need that. Just turn it around and have a little look at the ingredients. And
Yeah, absolutely. And when I first started taking beetroots, I've literally spent ages trying to find some juice which like had more than about 10 or 20%, and they just don't, just because obviously they need to create volumes, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's money, isn't it? It's cheaper
Yeah,
to put a bunch of water in it than like
exactly.
rack it up with beetroot.
Um, sorry, in terms of like other supplements, caffeine's probably the other one.
Oh
Yeah. Perfect.
yeah, and I think like supplements is one of those things, isn't it? And like trusted sources, like listen to you saying you want to help as many people as you can in the Hyrox space, and obviously you're very well educated, you've done your masters, and like you're the kind of person that it's nice to you want to listen to and you want to gain the advice from, because there's so many people on, say, Instagram, TikTok, even Facebook now, that they're a good athlete and then they share what they do, but that doesn't mean that it works for everybody. And like who the trusted sources are to listen to, and especially with supplements, sometimes it can be quite tainted because people are like sponsored by supplement companies, or supplement companies have this brand new, I don't know, flavor out, or this new, supplement of the year out that they want to try and push. I feel like sometimes to find a trusted source, which is why we wanted to have a chat with you on here today, just is a really hard thing, and especially with a lot of people, like you said, the accessibility to Hyrox and people being able to come in and race Hyrox and want to do their best, just to find a trusted source with something like nutrition is an awesome thing. And so aside from your amazing Instagram profile, which we obviously follow, are there any other trusted like sources that you suggest people could go to get more information on nutrition and race nutrition, sports nutrition specifically? Is there any websites you use or other people you follow that they?
Yeah, so I follow on Instagram. I follow a guy called, I'm gonna absolutely butcher his name. Joe, I'm gonna quickly get his book. What is it? Yeah, so like his name is Asker Joykendrop, which is like
fair. I can see how you needed the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I follow him, and he's like he's basically I think he's a doctor within sports nutrition. So he like his page is great, and he does focus a little bit more on like marathons and ultra endurance. So some of it isn't necessarily that relatable to Hyrox. Obviously, Hyrox is a lot shorter and higher intensity than these sorts of events. But he's always like on his Instagram page, he's constantly talking about like glucose usage and utilization and like hydration for endurance events, and it's all very much research backed, as opposed to like a really good athlete or an influencer who's got a big following and they're like, well, I take this, it works for me, you should too.
Yeah.
He's constantly doing like research stuff, so I follow a few people like that who they'll make statements, they'll show the evidence and everything else from a very kind of unbiased point of view, and so he's very good. He's probably someone which I would say, yeah, you could check out.
Oh yeah, no, that's brilliant.
And whilst we're on this, what's your Instagram handle for people to follow you?
So my Instagram handle is _nutrition guide Darryl.
Perfect.
Yes. If you put that nutrition, I probably will come up, because yeah, nobody else is stupid enough to come up with a name like that.
And you do nutrition programming for people. Can they get in touch with you over Instagram for that, or do you have a website, or what's the best way?
Yeah, so I have a website, but yeah, easiest way is to just jump on my Instagram and either DM me, or there's like a inquiry form attached to my Instagram where you can just fill out and just talk about what your challenges are, what your goals are, and I'll promptly respond.
Yeah, amazing.
And is it just what do you do, like one-to-one nutrition like planning, or do you do group stuff or seminars or anything like that?
At the moment, it's just one-to-one. Group coaching is something which I'm looking into. I'm just trying to work out the best way of doing it, just because nutrition it quite often needs to be quite specific. So I'm trying to, like, I've ran group coaching before, and sometimes it went really well. Sometimes it was hard for people to then bring it into their own lifestyles. So I'm trying to work out a way where it can be done successfully, because there's no point doing group coaching if nobody gets anything from it. But yeah, at the moment it's just one-to-one.
No, perfect.
And I've totally done this in the wrong order, because I've asked all of this before doing the cheeky insights, but now we could do the cheeky insights, if that's okay with you. We've got 8 questions for you.
Cool.
Is there anything else you wanted to add, Faye, before I go for it?
No, I think that's been good. It's been a bit like up and down, hasn't it? Like as soon as something's jumped into my mind, I'm like, oh, I really wanted to ask Darryl this. I'm going to ask him this. And
I know.
Yeah, thanks for bearing with us. It's been like.
I think we've covered most stuff. Fingers crossed. Okay, first one is, what shoes do you wear to race Hyrox?
I actually have them next to me because I saw the question. So I have, and I always forget what they're called. So I use Adidas Adizeros, which,
okay.
yeah, so a lot of people use like Puma or Saucony, but these trainers are so good because they're super light and they have like continental grip. So they're really good with the sleds and stuff. Whereas I find a lot of trainers are either really good for running, but they're slippery on the sleds, or the other way around, whereas these tend to be solid for both. And as soon as I started wearing those, my times dropped by like 10 minutes. So they're kind of like I'm probably a bit superstitious that I'm like, if I don't wear those, then I'm going to screw up. I'm an Adizero kind of guy.
Awesome.
Perfect. And then what venue is your favorite Hyrox venue?
My favorite, I'm going to say Vegas, just because it was
Gotta be.
epic, and you get to finish a race and then put everything on black. So
fair.
Happy days. And then favorite Hyrox station and why?
I love the. Do you know what? I love the sled, and that is really, that's a bit kind of, some people call me a weirdo, but I've always enjoyed playing with a sled and stuff. And even though in Vegas it ruined me, I just really enjoy the sled.
Yeah. Sometimes
The pull or the push, or both?
Push.
The push.
Yeah. Love it.
I mean, I can't say it's my favorite, but I'll let you have it.
Quads of steel.
If you could do a doubles Hyrox with anyone in the world, who would it be?
Oh, good question. I reckon I would do it with. I'd probably do it with my brother. I reckon, just because.
Nice.
Just because he is similar to me in a sense that we're similar age, super close. He's seen me doing Hyrox and he keeps asking me questions around it. He's keen to kind of get involved, and I feel like it'd be a cool way of him getting into it. But then also, like, it's a good power move because you can state your dominance over your sibling.
You do the sleds, he can do the burpees.
I'm a baby in my family, so now I can bring him to my event and be like, now it's my town.
But
hopefully he doesn't listen to this, because then he won't do it, will he?
I do think it's a good point though, like going into it, it's nice to do a doubles as a first race. I think like it feels good to have the support of someone else going around and being in it together.
Yeah, great.
Okay, well, we've covered the fueling for Hyrox, and if so, what do you use and when do you take it? So I'll move on from that one. What's your favorite type of training session for Hyrox?
So I love doing, like, which kind of goes why I love the sled. I love doing like heavy sled pushing straight into running or cycling, just really battering my quads. It's one of those where it's horrible, but like the feeling you get afterwards is so good. And I find, like, because when I went to Vegas, as I said, the sled ruined me, and it completely ruined my runs after and stuff like that. And I kind of stepped away from it thinking I'm never going to be in that position again. So I started hammering the sleds, and now it's like one of my strongest stations. So I just really enjoy just getting to that kind of like pain cave and just gripping on and just hoping for the best.
Yeah. Look, it's the achievement afterwards, so isn't it? It's the buzz afterwards. A lot of people say they're like interval sessions on the treadmill are their favorite, even though they're like their worst. But I think it's because you get to the end and you're still in one piece. You feel like I did it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, why should someone sign up for their first Hyrox?
As I said, it's just so accessible. It's such a great event in terms of the way it's put together. Yes, there's been a bit of controversy with certain events and stuff, but if you think about how many people are competing and there's like the odd hiccup here and there, like the event itself is epic, like the energy, the community is part of it. But as I said, like irrespective of if you're someone who's like never really trained before but just want to challenge yourself, or if you're someone who's always been into fitness and wants to like get back into some level of competitive sport, it's accessible for everyone. And as I said, like irrespective of what your goals are within Hyrox, it's so easy to feel like you've achieved something, whether that's getting a PB or like trying to get to the worlds or doing well in your age category, stuff like that. So I just think that, in terms of getting you active, and it's a good mixture of cardiovascular exercise and resistance, which is perfect for health, for optimizing your health.
Yeah, 100%. Totally agree. And lastly, is there anyone that you would like to see on our podcast, or any like person in a specific space that you would like to find out more about?
As in to do with Hyrox or just in general?
Mainly to do with Hyrox, along that lines.
Yeah, sure. Who would be cool to be on your podcast? Do you know what I'd actually quite like is actually maybe from like a spectator point or a judge, like maybe getting like
Mm,
Michelle is obviously the head judge of Hyrox. It'd be cool to like, because obviously we've had a lot of people who are like either good athletes within it or people who work within it, such as myself. But we don't often see like what goes on behind the scenes and stuff like that. So maybe having someone like Nat Voyle, who's obviously like the event manager for it, or maybe Michelle, who's like head judge, and just understanding the kind of like almost like the logistics and the kind of like back end side of things would be quite cool. Because I think,
Yeah.
as I mentioned, a lot of people go to these events and like a rower might not turn on. They'd be like, "Oh my god, this is rubbish." But actually, it'd be cool to kind of like really understand like how it's put together and stuff like that. Because as I said, it's a pretty well-oiled machine, I'd say.
yeah, I know. When we were at Olympia, like that was the biggest Hyrox event, wasn't it? And 3 days. And you think, God, people are starting at 8 a.m. and then we weren't competing until say 3. And there'd already been 2 days of people set off in waves of like every 10 minutes and there's the amount of people that had to go through the kit, the changes in kit for different categories. It is actually I don't even know where you'd start to
Yeah.
organize that. And
Yeah,
then we saw, didn't we? We went on the first day, and the next day they'd changed some stuff around. Like they'd moved the Puma shop upstairs, and they'd changed like entrance ways and done stuff. So they're obviously like consistently trying to improve it or make sure that like the systems are working to make it a better experience and make it work. So yeah, you do have to like it's incredible. Like
Yeah.
just that amount of people through a
yeah,
race like that.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. No, that's
Mental.
a good one. Yeah. Very good one.
We will for sure reach out. We have spoken to Nat, but she was funnily enough absolutely maxed
Yeah,
during the UK scene. So maybe once Worlds is finished and in a bit of an off season,
yeah,
while it goes down to Australia and stuff, we might be able to get some of the organizers on, unless they're just literally switching off and all on holiday because they're like, I can't do it.
out of office spot.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know. And do I blame them? Absolutely not. But yeah, that'll be a brilliant episode to see a bit more behind the scenes.
Yeah, without doubt.
So is there anything else you'd like to add, Darryl? Anything we haven't covered? Anything for the listeners that you think is important, or anything you want to get across before we wind up today's episode?
Just like test and learn, basically. Like test your race day strategy, test your hydration, your race week strategy. Don't get to your event, irrespective of its worlds or just a regional event. Don't get to the day and just be like, "Oh, what should I have?" And like, if you have any questions on any of that, by all means, just drop me a DM. I'm always speaking to people within the space who ask me questions and stuff like that. So by all means, yeah, DM me, ping me a message, and I'll happily give my 2 cents.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
It's been
Fun.
really interesting. I think we've both enjoyed it, haven't we, Em?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Really good.
And if you've enjoyed it as well, please share this episode on your socials. And if you've got time, click the follow button on for the show on your podcast platform. Head over to Darryl's Instagram page if there was anything you really wanted us to ask and we didn't ask that you want to find out about, and he'll help you out. So _nutrition guy, Darryl, is it at the end? That
Yeah,
underscore nutrition guy, Darryl.
yeah.
And if you want to find us on Instagram, we're at @rad_chix_. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.